Arthur Penelgon lived his life in straight lines. His drive to the school where he taught history was the same road, at the same time, every day. His lessons followed a syllabus he knew by heart. Even his favorite mug, a chipped brown thing with a faded picture of a castle, sat in the exact same spot on his desk every morning. There was a comfort in this routine, a safety. But sometimes, late at night, a quiet little thought would tap on the inside of his skull, asking if this was all there was. It was a question he always pushed away, like an ungraded paper he didn't want to face. It was on one of those perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoons that the straight line of his day suddenly curved. He was driving home, the familiar scenery blurring past his window, when a hand-painted sign caught his eye. It was a crooked piece of plywood, nailed to a fence post, with the words, "For sale, barn contents," scrawled in white paint. It was the kind of sign he always ignored. But for some reason that day he didn't. He turned his car down a gravel driveway he never knew existed, the crunch of the stones under his tires sounding loud and adventurous in the quiet countryside. The barn was old and leaning to one side, its red paint peeling like a sunburnt nose. The huge doors were slightly ajar, beckoning him with a sliver of darkness. Arthur pulled over, killed the engine, and felt a strange mix of foolishness and curiosity as he pushed one of the heavy doors open. The air that hit him was thick with the smell of time, dust, dry hay, and the sweet, musty scent of old wood. Light shafted in through cracks in the siding, illuminating dancing dust motes like tiny, floating stars. It was a treasure trove of forgotten things, rusted tools with wooden handles worn smooth by hands long gone, stack of yellowed newspapers, and an old plow that looked like a prehistoric beast skeleton. And then, there in the center of it all, as if holding court over the decay, was the piano. It was a grand piano, but grand in the way a ruined castle is grand beautiful in its sorrow. It was enormous, a dark wood monster that seemed to be sinking into the dirt floor. Its lid was closed, and the finish was so scratched and clouded with grime that you couldn't tell what kind of wood it was. One of its legs was clearly broken, propped up precariously by a wobbly stack of old bricks. Some of the ivory keys were chipped or missing entirely, leaving a gap-toothed smile against the dark wood. It looked pitiful. It looked hopeless. Yet Arthur couldn't look away. He walked towards it slowly, his footsteps crunching on the hay-strewn floor. He felt a pull, a strange and powerful sense of connection, as if this broken thing understood a part of him he kept hidden. He reached out and ran a hand along its curved side, wiping away a layer of dust to reveal a deep, rich mahogany underneath. It was like touching a face and finding it was still warm. "Ain't much to look at, is she?" a voice said, making Arthur jump. A man in dusty overalls and a feed cap was leaning in the barn doorway, watching him. He had a kind, weathered face and a gentle smile. "Name's Dale. My grandpa left all this junk behind." "It's quite a collection," Arthur said, his eyes still on the piano. Dale chuckled and walked over, patting the top of the piano. "This old thing? That's the crown jewel of the junk pile. My grandma won it in some silly card game back in the 50s. Couldn't play a note, neither could anyone in the family. It's been a joke to us for 50 years. We'd move it from one corner of the barn to another, always tripping over it. The kids used to play on it like it was a fort." "A joke?" The word stung Arthur a little. It didn't look like a joke. It looked like it had a story. "What are you asking for it?" Arthur heard himself say, his voice quieter than he intended. Dale looked at him, then at the piano, and let out a low, throaty laugh. "Son, you can have it for $100. Just get it out of my hair? The scrap man's coming next week, and he'll probably give me 20 for the metal parts in it. I'd rather it go to someone who looks at it like you're looking at it right now." So Arthur did it. He gave the man the $100 from his wallet, feeling both exhilarated and utterly insane. He arranged for a tow truck with a heavy-duty winch to come the next day. The whole operation cost him more than the piano itself, and he spent a sleepless night wondering if he had completely lost his mind. Getting the piano into his small, tidy house was a nightmare. The movers grumbled and sweated, scraping the doorframe and groaning under the weight. When they finally set it down in his living room, the space felt completely transformed, and not in a good way. The sofa looked small and sad. The tidy bookshelf looked fussy and plain. The piano sat there like a silent, injured elephant, dominating everything with its sheer, dusty presence. Its broken leg, now replaced by a stack of Arthur's own hardcover books, looked both sad and ridiculous. He felt a wave of doubt so strong it almost made him sick. His brother, Liam, and his sister-in-law, Chloe, were scheduled to come over for dinner that night. Arthur had thought about canceling, but that felt like admitting defeat. He spent the afternoon cleaning, trying to make the house look normal, but the piano remained the impossible-to-ignore centerpiece. Liam and Chloe arrived right on time. Liam was a big man with a loud laugh and a practical view of the world. Everything was either useful or useless, and there was very little in between. Chloe was stylish and sharp, her eyes always scanning for things that were out of place. They stepped inside, said their hellos, and then stopped. Their eyes went immediately to the piano. There was a moment of silence. Liam stared, his mouth slowly falling open. Then he let out a roar of laughter. It wasn't a mean laugh, but a big, booming, genuinely astonished laugh that echoed off the walls. "Arthur, what in the world is that?" he finally managed to say, pointing a finger. "Did a tornado go through an antique shop and drop its leftovers in your living room?" Chloe was quieter, but her reaction was somehow worse. She circled the piano slowly, a look of pity and horror on her face. She poked a stuck key with her finger. "It's a very unique piece, Arthur," she said in the gentle, patient tone one uses with a child who has made a terrible mess. "It's very rustic. What possessed you?" Arthur felt his face get hot. His heart started beating fast. He tried to explain about the barn, about the way the light hit it, the feeling he had. The words came out clumsy and weak. I don't know. I felt something." Liam clapped him on the back, still chuckling. "Felt something? Buddy, I feel a draft. You spent good money on this? I'll give you $50 and we can use it for firewood this winter. It'll probably last a week." Chloe smiled her tight, sympathetic smile. "It's okay, Arthur. It's a midlife thing. We understand. But maybe next time you could buy a sports car? Something a little more conventional." They moved on, talking about their day, but the joke of the piano hung in the air, invisible but heavy. Arthur watched them sitting on his normal sofa, drinking from his normal mugs, and he felt a million miles away. He looked at the piano. It sat there, silent and huge, a monument to his own foolishness. They were right, weren't they? It was a joke. A ridiculous, expensive, heartbreaking joke. As he listened to his brother's easy laughter, a quiet, stubborn thought began to form in the back of his mind. He looked at the chipped keys, the dusty wood, the impossible weight of it in his living room. They thought it was a joke. Maybe it was, but it was his joke now. And for some reason, he knew he wasn't done with it yet. The laughter of his brother and the soft, pitying words from his sister-in-law didn't fade away when they left. They settled into the corners of Arthur's small house like a fine dust, coating everything with a layer of doubt. Every time he looked at the piano, he didn't see the potential he had seen in the barn. He saw the ridiculous firewood Liam joked about. He saw the rustic centerpiece, Chloe had called it. The joy of the discovery was gone, replaced by a stubborn, heavy feeling of "I told you so" from the world. For the first few days, he almost ignored it. He'd come home from work, make his dinner, and sit in his armchair, pointedly looking away from the giant object taking up half his living room. He'd read a book, watch the news, anything to avoid its silent, broken presence, but then, one evening, a quiet thought pushed through the noise of his doubt. What if they were right? What if it was just a joke? The idea felt worse than giving up. It would mean the strange pull he felt in the barn, the irrational feeling that this thing mattered, was all just a figment of his imagination, a moment of madness. And that, Arthur decided, was a more painful failure than trying and failing. So he stood up, walked over to the piano, and pulled his laptop from the shelf. If it was going to be a joke, it would be his joke, and he was going to be in on the punchline. His first step was the internet, a rabbit hole of forums, videos, and articles filled with words he didn't understand. Action, soundboard, voicing, bridge pins. It was like learning a new language. He ordered a basic tuning kit online, a set of strange-looking tools that felt alien in his hand. That first Saturday, he sat on the rickety bench, opened the lid over the strings, and peered into the piano's guts. It was a dark, tangled forest of wire and wood, dusty and intimidating. He followed a video tutorial, carefully placing the tuning hammer on the first pin. He gave it a tiny turn. The resulting twang was so off-key and jarring it made his teeth ache. The neighbor's dog started barking. Arthur quickly twisted it back, his face burning with embarrassment. It was clear this wasn't something you could learn from a 10-minute video. The weeks that followed became a slow, lonely rhythm. His social life, which was already quiet, ground to a halt. Weekends were no longer for grading papers or taking a quiet walk. They were for the piano. He'd start with the simple things, the things he could do. He bought soft cloths and special wood oils, spending hours gently rubbing away decades of grime. As the dirt disappeared, the true wood began to show through. It was a deep, dark mahogany with a swirling, chocolatey grain that seemed to move under the light. It wasn't just a block of wood. It was beautiful. This small progress was a lifeline. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, there was something under all that dirt worth saving. His brother and sister-in-law, of course, became his unintentional critics. Liam would stop by sometimes, always with a new piece of advice. "You know, they make these amazing electric keyboards now," he'd say, holding up his phone to show a sleek, black instrument. "You can make 'em sound like anything. And they fold right up." Imagine that. Chloe's visits were more subtle. She'd bring over a home decor magazine and flip through it, pointing to pictures of clean, minimalist living rooms. "It's just so open, you know? No clutter. So peaceful." She never said the word piano, but she didn't have to. The message was clear. His beautiful project was their clutter. Arthur learned to smile and nod, to say that's interesting, while inside he was building a wall around his work. He didn't need their approval. He was doing this for himself. He started taking the piano apart piece by agonizing piece. He carefully labeled every screw, every felt pad, every tiny piece of ivory. He found a local woodworker, an old man named Gus, who ran a dusty shop filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. Gus took one look at the broken leg and the chipped keys and just nodded. "It's got good bones," he said, a phrase Arthur would hold on to for weeks. Gus showed him how to mix a compound to repair the cracks in the leg, how to gently sand and shape a new piece of ivory-colored plastic to fill the gaps in the keyboard. The real struggle, though, was the inside, the heart of the piano. He discovered that many of the small felt hammers that struck the strings were hardened and worn down, and dozens of parts were rusted. He spent countless hours hunched over the open body of the piano, using tiny screwdrivers and tweezers, replacing parts he'd ordered from specialty stores online. It was like performing microsurgery on a sleeping giant. There were nights he wanted to throw in the towel. One rainy Sunday, he was trying to pry loose a small, warped wooden panel from the underside, and his tool slipped, gouging a deep scratch into the wood. Frustration and exhaustion washed over him in a hot wave. He sat back on the floor, the damp air smelling of rain and his own disappointment. He was so far out of his depth. He was a history teacher, for heaven's sake, not a luthier. Maybe this was the curse. Not the piano's, but his own curse to love a project he wasn't skilled enough to finish. He sat there for a long time, just listening to the rain drumming on the roof. He was about to give up for the day when his eyes caught something. Where his tool had slipped, it had not only scratched the wood, but also pried up a tiny, folded piece of paper that had been tucked away in a small, recessed groove. His heart gave a little thump. With trembling fingers, he carefully worked the paper free. It was yellowed and brittle, folded into a tight square. He unfolded it as gently as he could. The ink was faded, written in a looping, elegant script. It wasn't a maker's label or a certificate. It was just a name, a date, and a short phrase. El Dubois, 1927. maudit par la musique, cursed by music. Arthur stared at the words. They weren't a joke. They weren't a note about a repair. They felt personal, almost desperate. Cursed by music. What could that possibly mean? A wave of something much stronger than doubt washed over him. It was intrigue. The feeling he had in the barn, that strange pull, came rushing back. This wasn't just a broken old piano anymore. It was a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved. He looked at the silent instrument with its beautiful wood and its broken heart. The joke wasn't on him. The joke was on everyone who had ever seen it as just a pile of junk. He folded the note carefully, put it in his wallet, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had to find out who El Dubois was. And he had to give this cursed piano its voice back. The laughter of his brother and the soft, pitying words from his sister-in-law didn't fade away when they left. They settled into the corners of Arthur's small house like a fine dust, coating everything with a layer of doubt. Every time he looked at the piano, he didn't see the potential he had seen in the barn. He saw the ridiculous firewood Liam joked about. He saw the rustic centerpiece, Chloe had called it. The joy of the discovery was gone, replaced by a stubborn, heavy feeling of "I told you so" from the world. For the first few days, he almost ignored it. He'd come home from work, make his dinner, and sit in his armchair, pointedly looking away from the giant object taking up half his living room. He'd read a book, watch the news, anything to avoid its silent, broken presence, but then, one evening, a quiet thought pushed through the noise of his doubt. What if they were right? What if it was just a joke? The idea felt worse than giving up. It would mean the strange pull he felt in the barn, the irrational feeling that this thing mattered, was all just a figment of his imagination, a moment of madness. And that, Arthur decided, was a more painful failure than trying and failing. So, he stood up, walked over to the piano, and pulled his laptop from the shelf. If it was going to be a joke, it would be his joke, and he was going to be in on the punchline. His first step was the internet, a rabbit hole of forums, videos, and articles filled with words he didn't understand. Action, soundboard, voicing, bridge pins. It was like learning a new language. He ordered a basic tuning kit online, a set of strange-looking tools that felt alien in his hand. That first Saturday, he sat on the rickety bench, opened the lid over the strings, and peered into the piano's guts. It was a dark, tangled forest of wire and wood, dusty and intimidating. He followed a video tutorial, carefully placing the tuning hammer on the first pin. He gave it a tiny turn. The resulting twang was so off-key and jarring it made his teeth ache. The neighbor's dog started barking. Arthur quickly twisted it back, his face burning with embarrassment. It was clear this wasn't something you could learn from a 10-minute video. The weeks that followed became a slow, lonely rhythm. His social life, which was already quiet, ground to a halt. Weekends were no longer for grading papers or taking a quiet walk. They were for the piano. He'd start with the simple things, the things he could do. He bought soft cloths and special wood oils, spending hours gently rubbing away decades of grime. As the dirt disappeared, the true wood began to show through. It was a deep, dark mahogany with a swirling, chocolatey grain that seemed to move under the light. It wasn't just a block of wood. It was beautiful. This small progress was a lifeline. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, there was something under all that dirt worth saving. His brother and sister-in-law, of course, became his unintentional critics. Liam would stop by sometimes, always with a new piece of advice. "You know, they make these amazing electric keyboards now," he'd say. "H?" The 4 words, maudit par la musique, became a constant whisper in Arthur's mind. Cursed by music. They changed everything. The project was no longer just about fixing a broken piece of furniture. It was about decoding a message left behind almost a century ago. That fragile, yellowed note was the first real proof he wasn't just chasing a fantasy. It was a clue. This realization fueled him with a new kind of energy, one that pushed away the exhaustion and the lingering sting of his family's jokes. His lonely evenings were no longer about struggle. They were about investigation. He became a detective of sorts. But his crime scene was history, and his clues were scattered across the internet. He started every night by typing L. Dubois into every search engine he could think of. The results were frustratingly sparse. A few lawyers here and there, a modern artist, a chef. Nothing that seemed to fit a piano maker from the 1920s. He tried adding words like piano, luthier, 1927. He spent hours scrolling through digital archives of old newspapers, squinting at blurry ads for piano tuners in music stores from a bygone era. It was like looking for a specific grain of sand on a beach. Weeks turned into a month, and Arthur was starting to feel the familiar creep of doubt. Maybe the note was a prank. Maybe some previous owner had just scribbled it to be mysterious. But then one night, deep in a dusty corner of a forum for antique instrument enthusiasts, he found a thread titled Phantom Pianos of France. His heart beat a little faster. The post was from a professor at a music conservatory in Paris. He was writing about a reclusive and almost mythical craftsman named Lucien Dubois. According to the professor, Dubois wasn't a manufacturer. He was an artist. He built a handful of grand pianos entirely by hand, each for a specific client who wanted something more than an instrument. They wanted a voice. The post mentioned that Dubois was obsessed with achieving a unique, almost human-like quality in the tone. He experimented with strange kinds of wood, used unconventional bracing techniques inside the body, and treated the strings with secret compounds. Arthur felt a jolt of electricity shoot through him. He grabbed a flashlight and ran to the living room, careful not to wake the neighbors. He opened the top of the piano again, the one he'd cleaned so painstakingly, and aimed the light inside. He started comparing what he saw to the professor's descriptions. The post mentioned a distinctive fanned bracing on the underside of the soundboard instead of the standard parallel beams. Arthur carefully angled his light, and there it was. A beautiful, complex pattern of wooden supports that fanned out from the center like the ribs of a giant leaf. It was exactly as described. The post also mentioned Dubois used a type of alpine spruce aged for decades for his soundboards. Arthur didn't know much about wood, but the light, creamy color of the soundboard, with its perfectly tight, straight grain, looked different from any other piano he had ever seen. The most exciting part of the forum post was the end. The professor wrote that almost all of Dubois's work was believed to have been lost in a tragic fire that destroyed his workshop in the late 1920s. He called them the phantom pianos, instruments of legendary sound that were now only whispers in music history. Arthur leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. He wasn't just restoring a joke. He had found a ghost. The dusty piano in his living room wasn't just a cursed object. It was a survivor. It had escaped the fire. It had traveled across an ocean. It had sat silent in a barn for half a century, waiting. This discovery was a secret victory, and it gave him a new kind of confidence. The next time his brother Liam stopped by, Liam started in on his usual routine. Still wrestling with the beast, I see? You know, my friend Dave just bought one of those digital pianos. Got 1,000 different sounds. You can make it sound like a spaceship if you want. Arthur didn't get defensive. He didn't try to explain the history. He just smiled and said, "That's nice. But I'm pretty happy with my spaceship." He patted the polished wood of the piano. For the first time, the joke felt like it was on Liam, not him. With the mystery of Dubois's guide, the restoration work took on a new meaning. Every challenge became a puzzle. One of the biggest hurdles was replacing the worn-out hammers, the little felt-covered mallets that struck the strings. He could have bought standard replacements, but the forum post had said Dubois voiced his hammers in a very specific way to create that singing tone. So Arthur dove deeper into his research. He found an old book in the university library, translated from French, that detailed historical piano-making techniques. It described how different densities of felt and slight changes in the hammer's shape could dramatically alter the sound. He spent weeks experimenting, ordering different types of felt, carefully steaming and shaping the new hammers by hand, trying to get them just right. It was painstaking, detailed work, but now it felt like he was honoring a craft, Not just fixing a machine. He was so absorbed in his work that he barely noticed the passing of the seasons. The leaves turned from green to gold and then fell, covering the world outside his window in a crunchy blanket. Winter set in, and he'd work by the light of a small lamp, the cold wind rattling the window panes while he worked in the warm glow of his project. The piano became his companion, a silent partner in his quest. He'd talk to it sometimes. "All right, Mr. Dubois," he'd mutter. "Let's see what you were thinking here." The work wasn't without its setbacks. He once spent an entire day carefully regulating the action, the complex mechanism that connects the keys to the hammers, only to find he'd set it too tightly and a whole section of keys were stuck. He had to undo hours of work, his fingers numb and his back aching. But the frustration was always temporary, replaced by a deep-seated determination. He was no longer just Arthur, the history teacher. He was Arthur, the keeper of the phantom piano. Slowly, piece by piece, the piano was coming back to life. The outside gleamed with a deep, warm shine. The keyboard, with its new ivory replacements, looked whole and inviting. The inside, once a tangled mess of rust and dust, was now a clean, intricate landscape of wood, felt, and wire. It was almost ready. He had done his part. He had brought the patient back from the brink. It was time to see if the heart would beat. The thought of that first chord was both terrifying and exhilarating. It would be the moment of truth. After all this, after all the research and the lonely nights, would it be a masterpiece? Or would the curse be real after all, and all it would produce was a jangling, discordant mess? He sat on the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys, and took a deep breath. The house was silent, waiting. The day the piano was finally whole felt different from any other day. The air in Arthur's small house seemed to be humming with a quiet electricity. For 6 months, his world had been a blur of wood shavings, specialty glue, and the faint scent of varnish. The piano, once a dusty, broken giant, now stood in his living room like a restored statue. Its mahogany gleamed with a deep, liquid shine. The keyboard, with its carefully repaired keys, looked whole and full of promise. The scratches and dents were gone, replaced by the smooth, unbroken beauty of the wood grain. It looked magnificent, but looks were only the shell. The real question, the one that had kept him up for countless nights, was still unanswered. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet. There were no tools to organize, no parts to clean, no research to be done. The project that had consumed his life was finished. There was nothing left to do but listen. This thought was more terrifying than any broken hammer or stuck key he had faced. All his hope, all his research, all his solitary effort was about to be put to the test. If the sound was wrong, if it was tinny or weak or just plain dead, then the last 6 months would have been nothing more than a very elaborate, very expensive delusion. He waited until the sun had gone down, until the world outside his window was dark and quiet. He wanted no distractions. He made a cup of tea, his hands trembling just a little, and sat on the bench. The felt was cool and firm beneath him. He looked at the keys, starkly white against the dark wood. They looked like an invitation. He placed his fingers on them, his fingers feeling clumsy and big. What should he play? He wasn't a concert pianist. He was a history teacher who knew a few simple songs from his own childhood lessons. He needed something simple, something he could play without thinking, something that would let the piano do the talking. He chose Debussy's Clair de Lune. He had always loved it. And more importantly, it was a piece mentioned in one of the old articles about Dubois, a favorite of the composer-clients who cherished his work. It felt right, like a tribute. He took a deep breath, the air in his lungs catching a little, and pressed down on the first key. The sound that filled the room wasn't just a note. It was an event. It was a rich, warm, velvety tone that seemed to bloom in the air instead of just appearing. It had a depth and a complexity he had never heard from any instrument before. It was a sound that felt like it had substance, like you could almost reach out and touch it. It didn't just fill the room. It filled him. The doubt, the exhaustion, the frustration of the past 6 months, it all melted away with that single, perfect note. He closed his eyes and let his fingers find the next notes. As the melody of Clair de Lune began to weave through his living room, Arthur felt like he was discovering the piano for the first time. The bass notes were full and resonant, like a deep, wise voice speaking in low, comforting tones. The high notes were clear and bright, like tiny bells ringing in a distant, peaceful valley. But the most magical part was the sustain. When he held a note, it didn't just fade away into silence. It lingered, singing and vibrating in the air, creating a soft, ethereal harmony with the notes that came after it. It was exactly what the articles had described, a voice, a human-like quality. He was no longer just playing notes on a keyboard. He was having a conversation. The curse of music, it seemed, was actually a gift. He was so lost in the sound, so completely absorbed in the miracle happening under his fingers that he didn't hear the front door open. He didn't hear the quiet footsteps in the hallway. It was only when he finished the first few phrases, letting the last note hang in the air, that he became aware of two figures standing in his doorway. Frozen in place. It was Liam and Chloe. They had let themselves in with the spare key, as they often did, probably to drop off a lasagna or ask if he wanted to go to a movie. But they stopped dead. Their conversation cut short by the river of music flowing from the living room. There was no laughter this time. There was no look of pity. Liam stood with his mouth slightly agape, his usual easygoing confidence replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered astonishment. His eyes were wide, darting from Arthur's hands on the keys to the gleaming body of the piano, as if trying to piece together an impossible equation. Chloe was even more still. Her hand was resting on her chest, and her eyes had a glassy, faraway look. They weren't looking at a piece of rustic junk. They were looking at something they couldn't understand, something beautiful and profound. Arthur, startled, stopped playing. The sudden silence in the room felt heavy and awkward. Liam was the first to move. He took a slow, hesitant step into the room, his eyes never leaving the piano. "Arthur," he said, his voice a low whisper, completely unlike his usual boisterous tone. "What? What is that?" He didn't wait for an answer. He walked slowly around the piano, his hand hovering over the curved side, as if he was afraid to touch it. He looked at the beautiful wood, at the intricate carvings he had never bothered to notice before. He ran a finger over a perfectly restored key. Chloe followed, her usual cool demeanor completely gone. She sat down quietly on the edge of the sofa, her gaze fixed on the instrument. "I've never heard anything like that," she said, her voice soft and filled with genuine wonder. It sounds like it's alive." Arthur felt a swell of emotion in his chest. It wasn't pride. It was relief, a deep, cleansing relief. They finally heard it. They finally saw it. They weren't looking at a joke anymore. "Play something else," Liam said, his voice still full of awe. "Please?" So Arthur did. He played a little of a Chopin waltz, then a simple folk song he remembered from his own childhood. With each piece, the piano revealed a different facet of its personality. It could be playful and bright, or somber and thoughtful, or powerful and dramatic. It was a chameleon, a storyteller. Liam and Chloe sat in silence, completely captivated. They weren't just listening. They were witnessing. They were seeing the dusty, broken piece of firewood transform into a priceless work of art right before their eyes. This was the proof. Not the research, not the beautiful wood, not the cryptic note. The music was the only proof that mattered. It was a roar, and it was silencing every doubt, every joke, every skeptical whisper that had haunted him for so long. The piano was speaking, and its voice was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The last note from the piano seemed to hang in the air for a long, long time, a soft, shimmering ghost that refused to disappear. In the silence that followed, the only sound in the room was the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, a sound that had never seemed so loud or so ordinary. Liam and Chloe didn't speak. They just sat there, lost in the world the music had created. Arthur, his fingers still resting on the keys, felt a wave of emotion so strong it was hard to breathe. It was a mixture of relief, pride, and a deep, profound joy that seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in his heart. Finally, Liam let out a slow, long breath. He walked over to the piano, but not with the critical eye of a brother teasing his sibling. He moved with the reverence of someone approaching a great work of art in a museum. He gently traced the elegant curve of the piano's side. "All this time," he said softly, more to himself than to Arthur, "I was looking at a box of wood. I had no idea there was a voice inside." Chloe rose from the sofa and came to stand beside him. She looked at Arthur, and her usual cool, polished expression was gone, replaced by something soft and apologetic. "Arthur, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The things I said about it being clutter. I feel so foolish." Arthur shook his head, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "It's okay. I don't think I knew either, not really. Not until just now. That night changed everything." The joke was over, and in its place was a shared sense of wonder. Liam, who had spent his life building practical things with his hands, now looked at the piano with a new understanding of craft and dedication. Chloe, who always valued the sleek and the modern, now saw the profound beauty in something with a story and a soul. Their visits were no longer about offering gentle, condescending advice. They were about asking to hear the piano play again. Arthur's house was no longer a place of quiet routine. It had become a small sanctuary of music. The story of the phantom piano, as Arthur started to call it, couldn't stay contained within the four walls of his living room. He had to share it. He wrote a detailed email to the professor at the Paris Conservatory, whose forum post had set him on this path. He included photos of the piano, of the unique bracing inside, and a clear scan of the note, modi par la musique. He even attached a simple recording he'd made on his phone. The reply came 2 days later, and it was everything he could have hoped for. The professor was ecstatic, calling the discovery monumental and a musicological miracle. He confirmed the unique bracing. The wood, the construction, everything matched the descriptions of Dubus's lost work. He promised to make inquiries and spread the word. Within his network of historians and musicians, it wasn't long before the phone started ringing. First it was a local reporter, then a writer from a national music magazine. An expert from a prestigious museum in a big city flew out to see it for himself, spending an entire day with Arthur, examining every inch of the piano, his eyes wide with a scholar's feverish excitement. He confirmed its immense value, not just in money but in cultural significance. It was a one-of-a-kind piece. A bridge to a lost era of craftsmanship. The expert made him an offer, an enormous sum of money that would have changed his life. He could buy a new house, travel the world, retire early. Arthur was tempted for about 5 minutes. He thought about the day in the barn, the pull he felt, the lonely nights spent coaxing it back to life. The piano wasn't an asset to be sold. It was a story to be shared. It wasn't his to own. It was his to care for. He politely declined the offer. Instead, he worked out a different kind of deal. He arranged to loan the piano to the music department at the local university, on the condition that it be kept in a concert hall where students and faculty could play it, and where it could be properly maintained. It was a perfect solution. The piano would have the audience it deserved, and Arthur would still be able to visit it, to hear it sing. A year passed. Life for Arthur had found a new kind of normal. He was no longer just a history teacher. He was also a sought-after speaker, invited to tell the story of the phantom piano at conferences and events. He was still a quiet, humble man, but there was a new lightness in his step, a confidence that came from knowing he had followed a strange, silent calling and been rewarded for it. One crisp autumn evening, there was a special recital at the university's concert hall to celebrate the piano's first anniversary there. The hall was filled. On the stage, under the warm glow of the spotlights, sat the Dubois piano, looking grand and elegant, its polished wood reflecting the light like a dark mirror. Arthur was on stage, sitting on the bench, ready to play the opening piece. The nerves were there, a flutter in his stomach, but they were overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. He looked out into the audience. There, in the front row, sat Liam and Chloe, beaming. When they saw him look at them, Liam gave him a big, proud thumbs up, and Chloe waved, her eyes shining. Arthur turned back to the piano. He placed his fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar, smooth ivory beneath his touch. He thought about the dusty barn, the pile of junk, the laughter, the doubt, the long nights, and the small, fragile note that had started it all. It had all been a journey, a wild, improbable, wonderful journey. He took a breath and began to play Claire de Lune. The music filled the hall, clear and pure and full of life. It was the sound of history, of passion, of a craftsman's soul, and of one quiet teacher who refused to believe a joke was just a joke. And as the melody washed over the silent, captivated audience, Arthur smiled, realizing that in the end, he hadn't just given the piano its voice back. It had, in turn, given him his. And that was the most beautiful, harmonious sound of all.